We had a president once. His name is Jimmy Carter. Now, Jimmy is very sick at the moment, and we're going to be hearing a lot of nice things about Jimmy Carter. Some say, well, he wasn't exactly the best president we ever had. However, we must say about him, he was a good man. And as a matter of fact, his post-presidency was probably one of the best in American history. I'm told that he still lives in the same house that he had before he even entered high office as governor. A two-room rancher worth only a couple of $100,000. So, good man. And I think everybody would have to agree that he deserves respect. One thing, though, that people don't give him credit for is that he was a man of great insight. He gave a speech once that did not go over very well. As a matter of fact, people were rather disappointed, and they still make fun of it today because it wasn't the politically correct thing to do. See, everybody's supposed to be upbeat all the time, and everything has to be great and okay, like the best unemployment rate in history, the best healthcare program ever. Everything has to be the best. Well, Jimmy Carter gave a speech called that America is in a malaise. Remember that one? A malaise. You know what a malaise is? A malaise is that you're kind of in a deep funk. How do you like that? You know what a deep funk is? A deep funk. You're kind of down, you're kind of miserable, you're kind of empty, you feel kind of hopeless. That's what's being in a malaise. And he said that's what we're experiencing here in America. We're going through it again. But let's talk about this Samaritan woman. You know why? She was in a malaise. She was in a malaise. She's probably going to that well, and life was full of disappointments for her. It was rather empty. Her life was an empty life. Jesus says, you had 5 husbands already. Basically, what he's saying is, you just about tried everything, and you're still miserable. And probably if she had the courage, or if Jesus didn't show up, she may have jumped in the well. That's what happens to a lot of people when they feel that life is hopeless, that they just want to end their life, or they just kind of walk around in this daze, this funk, and there's no energy, there's no joie de vivre. You know what that is? That's French. It means no excitement about living, because in their minds, there is nothing to live for. That's the state of mind of this Samaritan woman until she meets Jesus. And then everything's turned around for her. And at the end of my remarks tonight, we'll just talk about that, how important that is. At the moment, we are experiencing a malaise in this country. Oh, Father Orsi said we're in a malaise. Not a mayonnaise, a malaise, okay? So when you give that definition, you say we're in a deep funk. We're in a deep funk. And I'm going to give you some indications of that. What about this deep funk? Reading recently that since the COVID episode, a lot of people left the workforce. There are still 2 million people who have not returned to the workforce. 2 million. A lot of people not working. And they're not old people like you. All right, me too. Okay. And a lot of them are these younger people. We call them the millennials. And what happened? What happened to them? Well, they just would rather do nothing. No ambition. We have what they call a gig job. You know what a gig job is? This is a new one on me too, a gig job. It's like you have a temporary job. You go out and you be a waiter or a waitress, and you become that for a little while. Or you get a job that, you'll get a certain number of days or weeks in or months in, and then you can, quit the job or get fired. And what do you do then? You go back on government assistance, you see? And so there's no enthusiasm about getting a full-time job. I couldn't wait. When I was, 13, 14, 15, You couldn't wait to get a job, and you would kind of take anything. You wanted to make money, right? You wanted to make money. And then my mother would say to me, you got to put the money in the bank. You got to save it because someday you're going to need that money. For what, Ma? You want to go to school? Want to raise a family? But a lot of people don't think that way. Young people aren't thinking that way anymore. Why? There's no enthusiasm about life. I make a couple of bucks, I'll get some government assistance, and I'll stay home and live in the basement. A lot of them are living in the basement these days. In Florida, I don't know where they live. There's no basement. They live out in the woods. Okay, live out in the woods. All right. That's one example. Second example is we have the numbers are unbelievable, of young men. I call the Generation Zs to the millennials, and that's, I guess, from 13 years old to 30 years old, okay? 13 to 30, I guess that's the way they describe the Generation Z, Gen Zs, and the millennials. And a lot of these young men, the number is 60% of these young men are not even interested in dating. What the heck is going on? I mean, that's all you have in your mind when you're a young man. You know what I'm saying, all right? You know what I'm saying. They're not dating, and they have no interest in getting married, and just up to 30 years old. And guess what? I thought, they would be saying that they're just shacking up. That means mortal sin, just shacking up, all right? Mortal sin. They're not doing that either. Instead, they're committing another mortal sin. They are in love with pornography. That's how bad it is. And when people get hooked on pornography, it is a sign of hopelessness. It's a sign that, you've just turned in on yourself and that life is not worth living. You don't want any wife. You don't want any children. You fell in love with remember we used to say the girl behind the magazine? Now it's the internet, pornography. No desire for marriage, no desire for children, no desire for work. That's a malaise. See, that's a malaise. Lastly, maybe an example, young girls. Young girls. The percentage now is 60% of young women are depressed, they are lonely, and they contemplate suicide. That's young women. That's a high number of people, young girls, be angry, depressed, and feeling like life is not worth living. Why? Many of them spend their days, once again, on the computer, on the internet. They think they're making friends on the internet. They're coming in contact with people who are not always the best of people. They have images of them, of what they should be doing, what they can be doing, how they should look. And they feel that they're just not measuring up to the standards of society, or find themselves terribly confused with and there are creeps on the internet, in the chat rooms, confusing them. And that's why up to 60% of young women contemplate suicide. Not too far from where the Samaritan woman was. She had a poor self-image. She didn't have an internet. She had the neighbors. Did it make her feel good about herself? She knew she wasn't the best person in the whole world until she met Jesus. She met Jesus. Gave her a whole different outlook on life. There's spirit and truth. Spirit and truth. And that begins a change for her in her way of thinking about herself. Let's go a step further. Samaritan woman was not only about this one individual woman that had her issues. It's about all her neighbors too. See, she represents all of us. You notice she didn't just stay by the well and say to Jesus, thank you for the advice. She went into town and she told other people about Jesus. Why? People in town too. The whole neighborhood was feeling the same thing. We have an expression, that which we think is most personal is most common. That which is most personal is most common. And if I went to a college campus today and I spoke the way I just spoke to you a little while ago about the lack of marriage and desire for young men, the lack of jobs, the feelings of inadequacy and suicidal thoughts, they would resonate with that. Let's talk about what's going on in our society as a whole. And maybe this resonates with you. As I said, America is experiencing a malaise. Why? Because we feel hopeless and we feel helpless. We feel betrayed. We can't find our way out of it. I'll give you some examples. How many people feel very frustrated with our government? Oh, let's just take some examples. Ah, dear. Have you heard about that fellow with the horns on his head, the shaman? We can't get the truth out of January 6th yet. We don't know if our government is telling the truth, half-truth, or lying to us. We don't know. And we feel helpless. We feel hopeless. You know, what can we do? Our country is slipping through our fingers. We can't trust the government anymore. What about COVID? We can't even find out where it came from. I'm sorry, some of us know where it came from. We get all kinds of different reports, don't we? Oh, it came from China. No, it didn't come from China. Oh, yes, it did come from China. No, it didn't come from China. Oh, be quiet. Who cares where it came from? It doesn't make any difference. Yes, it does. We've lost trust in the government. We can't believe what the government is telling us anymore. We're manipulated. We feel hopeless and helpless. Lastly, and I could go on for quite some time, as you well know, Ukraine. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Don't get me wrong, I feel very sorry for the Ukrainian people, but I also feel sorry for the Russian people. Do you know thousands of young men on both sides are being killed? And who's supplying the money? Who? We are. We are. Money? The money buys weapons. Where do the weapons come from? From the military-industrial complex. That's where it comes from. And that money gets recycled. When they say they can't find it, oh, yes, they can. And here we are. The greatest country on the face of the earth. And people who stand for justice. And people who have a reputation for trying to do the right thing. We find ourselves being duped by our own government. The blood of those Ukrainians and those Russians, they are on our hands. And that's why we feel helpless and hopeless. Could you imagine? Nobody has even suggested, I beg your pardon, someone did suggest that we have a peace conference, that someone broker a deal between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Guess who? China! What? Yeah, we're in a malaise. We're in a malaise. When there is no spirit, when there is no truth, we're in a malaise. Because we know when there's no spirit of God, when there is no truth, that we have failed as a society, and that our leaders have failed us, and that our government has failed us. Let me tell you the upside of this. The only one that hasn't failed us is Almighty God. Hasn't failed us. He didn't fail this lady by the well, did he? He didn't tell her, here, honey, let me help you jump in. Some of you may have heard of this. A couple of weeks ago, there is a college, university, called Asbury University. You heard about it? Sometimes I get down on down on ourselves and down on the young generation. Nah. Asbury University had a chapel service. Sunday night chapel service. And the kids didn't want to leave. How's that? And they stayed 2 weeks. They continued the prayer service for 2 weeks until the university said, hey, you have to go home. We don't want this to become, like a circus here, because the media started to get involved and wanted to go and do some interviews over there. They told even Tucker Carlson, Tucker, stay home. This is a religious event. And just a few days ago, I was meeting with a Protestant pastor, and he says to me, he said, it's happening all over the country. Asbury University was the first that got the attention, but these prayer meetings, these revivals are taking place all over the country. And so, if you feel like this poor Samaritan woman, you feel despondent, you feel like you're in a deep funk, you feel like you're depressed, you feel like there's no way out of your situation, just remember, human beings will always invariably let us down. Jesus never does, and he comes to our rescue. I love you.